Welcome back to the Wealth Actually podcast. I'm Frazer Rice. We have an extra special treat this week. I'm going to be talking with Bram Weinstein. He's the voice of the Washington Commanders, a former ESPN anchor, and the founder of Ampire Media. He's going to talk a little bit about the arc of a broadcast career and what it looks like to start a media company. Finally, we're going to talk about the resurgence of the Washington Commanders, my favorite football team. Welcome aboard, Bram.
Hey, Frazer, how are you?
It's great to have you on. Big Commander fan, and I listen to your show and Keim's show as well pretty religiously, so it's a treat to have you on. Help us a little bit understand what it takes to get on air and to become on-air talent, and maybe what you thought going through your background as you had that journey.
So I always knew I wanted to do it when I was a kid. It's funny, I've been an adjunct professor, and I have kids of my own now, and the more I'm around younger people, the more I realize how unusual it was that I kind of knew what I wanted to do when I was a little kid. I would sit in front of the television and pretend to be calling games and pretend to be part of sports. And I was like an okay athlete, but I knew I wasn't going to go in that realm. And so I kind of just knew early. I loved it. I loved being part of it. I practiced being it. I envisioned it. And so I followed that through high school. I was writing for the school newspaper and doing PA announcing, whatever they would let me do. I had internships in college at Channel 9 locally, WUSA with Warner Wolf, who's very famous broadcaster. I was, at Sports Talk 980 when it was a nascent only sports radio station in town. I was an intern there, and then one of my first jobs was there. So I just kind of knew what I wanted to do, and I'm very fortunate to be doing it here. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. I'm a fan of these teams. I'm a humongous fan of the Redskins football team Commanders, and it's a dream job that I'm in now.
So as you became on-air talent and you've gone through the exercise you went through and became an ESPN Sportscenter anchor, which is a gigantic role. How did you start looking at it from a production standpoint? For our listeners who are looking at businesses and sort of where to go on that front, what evolved your thinking on that?
So actually going to ESPN was a great learning experience, production at the highest level of sports content. And, the further I get away from it, the more I'm kind of in awe of not just the quality, but the quantity of the quality that they're able to put out every single day. There's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pieces of content that they do, and the quality level is so high. And so I just kind of watched what they did as I was kind of going through ESPN. So I was there from 2008 to 2015. And, as the media business was changing, the positions we were in were not as secure. There were waves of layoffs going on there. Other places, you'd see local sports markets diminishing the value of local sports coverage to the point where some local, stations don't even have sports departments any longer, which I think is crazy, especially in a market this size with teams that are this important that I think that the viewers want to hear and have access to and know about. And in fact, I know that the audiences haven't gone anywhere. As I watched all this happen and kind of the fracturing of the media environment in the rise of the digital age with podcasts, digital video, et cetera, success stories like Barstool, The Ringer, et cetera, it became clear to me that to survive in this business, and I'd always had kind of an entrepreneurial spirit anyway, but to really survive as I'm heading into middle age, it was going to be necessary to kind of diverge and find different tracks. So I just kind of jumped in after ESPN ended, taking the experience of seeing how they produce things, why they produce things, who they direct it towards, and knowing that my own personal brand and my on-air brand was going to potentially have to survive outside of traditional linear media. I felt the time was right that while I was still in it, to build this second track, try to own my own, regional/national media company, and eventually put my show on it. And I've been very fortunate actually to still be in traditional broadcast media in a variety of forms, even into my 50s now. That's been the lucky part. I started this, I'm doing this, but I still have a role in all of these larger, bigger platforms.
One of the cool things that I notice is you are able to straddle traditional and podcast. And the lawyer in me sort of looks at this and says, oh my gosh, how does he figure this out as far as, if I reference the McDLT, sort of keeping the hot side hot and the cool side cool and making sure everyone is copacetic with what you're trying to build here. How did you think about that? I mean, do you have sort of a legal team in place, or do you have sort of a good sense of how that works and just negotiate it as part of your overall strategy?
I mean, I do have agents, obviously, but I have in recent years, really, I've kind of negotiated on my own. And I actually feel like that, if you just have honest conversations about where things are going, how it all fits and works together, I found that most of the people I work with have been, open to new modern ideas. Like, the most recent thing that I did, which I wasn't sure would happen, was I never had my show on my network because I was contractually competing with myself by being on local radio at the ESPN affiliate here, ESPN 630 in Washington, D.C. And when my contract recently came up over the summer, I just went to them and said, one, I need to change my schedule. I was still doing live radio in the middle of the afternoon. This is my 5th season calling the Commanders. In the fall, it just becomes extremely difficult to do what I need to do to prepare for the games, to cover the team, and do the radio show at the same time. So I went to them and said, I just need to change my schedule. And oh, by the way, I really want to own my own show. And I think the time has come for that. And they were open to it. They seem to understand that this is the direction we're going, that I'm valuable enough, as probably with my standing in the community, especially, being the voice of the team, that they don't want to lose me from their airwaves, but they understand that they weren't nimble enough to put my podcast in a place where it really should be to grow. And so they were willing to work with me on that. I didn't know how that would work out. Like, typically in the past, this was if you either want to be here exclusively with us or you don't. And it's just kind of a red line. And I'm finding more and more of the, traditional legacy media operations are more willing to work with you and be creative that way, which is, I think it's good for the creators. It's good for the hosts. It's good for these companies too, to maintain what is, I think, kind of a nimble relationship now. Like, I think we've met somewhere in the middle. Like, when all this digital stuff started happening, and when I was at ESPN, I had a very restrictive contract that didn't allow me to do anything without their say, literally anything. And there were a number of times that things were turned down, and I'm not the only one who went, through this. They had to grace anything that you were going to do. One of the things that was important to me when I left ESPN was never to be in a position like that again, to never in this media cycle have such a restrictive contract with any one particular employer that I wouldn't be able to do other things in a more modern and fast changing space. And there's good and bad that goes with it. There's an incredible amount of security in working for a company like ESPN. Like, they give you a lot, from the platform to branding to an education like I got with them to ego stroking. I mean, you're part of Sportscenter, you're part of some of the biggest brands in the world. But at the same time, on the other side, you can't grow. You can't do anything without them saying yes to it. So, I've kind of lived both sides of that. And I've just decided, not that I want to be a perpetual freelancer, but in media now, there are very few very secure, very lucrative positions like it used to be. And I think if you're not thinking that way, you're going to have a hard time carving out a path that has any longevity to it.
Yeah. I mean, not everyone can be Stephen A. Smith and those types of folks. And it seems like it's very fragile. That, if you're Disney and all of a sudden you have a bad quarter because Guardians of the Galaxy 6 didn't work out, then all of a sudden they start looking for other things to trim. And you're like, well, wait a minute, how'd that work?
Yeah, well, they also have, a select few people. It's not begrudging them. I think Stephen A. Smith does a great job. He draws ratings. So does Pat McAfee. So do a couple of select others that are there. They're now making a salary that dictates that what we used to call at ESPN the middle class kind of gets cut out. So once you get to a certain point in salary, and it's a fraction of what those people are making, well, they just replace you very quickly. And this has happened in waves at a place like ESPN and other places too, across sports media, really everywhere. I mean, salaries have really been slashed as resources have changed. And at ESPN, they're clearly pushing all the chips in on a few select major talent personalities. And if you're not one of them, then you're in a very fragile space at a place like that. And it used to be very different. Like, when I grew up and I watched George Michael or Glenn Brenner or some of these other local anchors that maybe some of your listeners have no idea who I'm talking about, but Google George Michael.
George Michael Sports Machine.
Yeah, they were never leaving a position like this. It was very hard because it was sought after, it was lucrative, it was important. And because of the fractured media environment, very little of that exists. So I understand what ESPN's doing. They're going, we got to keep our audience together. And there's a high value on the people who can do that. Pat McAfee, Stephen A. Smith, whether you like them or not, do that. So I understand why they do what they do. But for people like me, who feel like we still do this at a very high level, but we don't aggregate audiences like that, where is our place in all of this? And often it is now in a number of different roles if you're willing to take on a number of different roles.
So one of the things that I think is interesting with Ampire Media, which is your production company, you produce your own show, but you have other people involved too, and you have other talent. How do you go about thinking about that in terms of your own attempt at aggregating different people's ratings, different people's followings into something that you're producing and able to take to the market?
So I think my strength is I kind of know what fans want, especially of the Commanders. I've lived and breathed the NFL and them for a long time. So I can help the people that I work with structure their shows in ways that I think are appealing to our fan base, because I think I intimately know that part. The rest of it is what I'm learning. Understanding the analytics, the data of when to upload, what social media clips work, which ones do not. When should shows be released? What should be on YouTube and what shouldn't be on YouTube? That's been a lesson I've been learning throughout this year. So all of that side of it has been a learning experience. The entrepreneurial side. I've been talent my whole career. I've been contracted talent. I've just watched what everyone else is doing and then tried to incorporate a lot of those lessons. And because we are, we're getting bigger shows now, but when I started this, we're small, podcasts that would be top, 10 to 20% of all podcasts, especially in the sports realm. But still, there's not a high return in terms of advertisement value. So we had to grow very, very slowly. I've bootstrapped the majority of this. I edit still a lot of the podcast. We freelance out a lot of the social media work or the artwork or things like that. But I'm very careful not to have a big staff that we can't support based just on advertising money. So we're just kind of growing. We've hit what I think is going to be a tipping point this year because of my show being able to be on the network now when it wasn't in the past, and an addition of another show from Ben Standig from The Athletic. We feel like we have an opportunity because all of these other legacy media stations have decreased their resources, are putting out less content. But to the earlier point that I tried to make, the fans never went anywhere. They just need to find out where the best information and best shows now exist. And we're hoping to kind of corner that with the Commanders and hopefully some other DC sports teams as well. But that's the opening that we see. And now that we have what I feel like is a bigger and more vibrant catalog than we've had in years past, there is an opportunity to kind of upscale the business in a way that maybe would take some of this off of my own plate.
Right. I mean, just the editing part alone is hours and hours at times. And for my own personal podcast, and, when I sort of talk about it with other people, I'm like, my gosh, that's the first thing I delegate because I've got other things going on. How do you find the time for all this? Or I mean, how do you break down your schedule, I guess, so that you can do everything and do it well?
I like to work. So I think it's just, that's hard to answer other than, I don't think work ever turns off for me, but that's also a life in sports. Like when I talk to young people about it, you are going to give up a lot of your social life. The games are going to take precedence. It's not a hobby. It really is a lifestyle. It really becomes a dominant portion of your life. So balancing, being in sports and sports media and having prominent roles in it, you have to be available to do things at all times, any day of the week. It's 7 days a week, especially during football season. I don't have an off day. That doesn't exist, until we get to January. So balancing that with your family is actually very hard to do. And for younger people who get in, understanding that your social life is going to be wildly different if you're really serious about this than all of your friends. You have to get accustomed to that. So I think this is just now, it's years of my schedule's just like this. I don't work a 9-to-5 job. That doesn't exist in my world. So I don't really see it as arduous in any way. It's just kind of the cost of doing business to have one of the most fun jobs in the world.
The fantasies of it for a lot of us sort of look at it and say, geez, this must be amazing. But yeah, the work involved, the early part of the career when you get, to get on air or get the chance, so you have to go out to South Dakota or Albuquerque or something like that to take advantage of a small number of opportunities. As you sort of look at TikTok and Instagram and some of the other venues that people have access to get on air and get that experience, I assume that's significantly different than when you started out in the business. Is that a plus or a minus, or is it just is a thing, and that if you're good and you work hard at it, it's a way of getting out there?
It's all of it. I think it's a plus more than anything. I think it offers opportunity for everybody to get past the gatekeepers of, it used to be media companies hold the keys to you having a platform where people could see you. Well, that's over with now. You could start your own vlog, you can start your own blog, you can start your own podcast, you can do anything. You could do it on any of these platforms that you want. They're all very different. So I think that's the part that I think people need to learn, and where experienced communicators and broadcasters can help people understand that when you're speaking to someone on Twitter, as opposed to Instagram, as opposed to a long form podcast, as opposed to hosting a show on a linear digital, traditional media space, they're all actually, the presentation is all very, very different from one another. They're all rooted in the same style of communication, but there are nuances to it where you can actually be effective in all of them. And I'm still learning that. I'm in my 50s, so TikTok is very foreign to me in trying to actually communicate on it. Instagram is easier for me. I'm starting to understand what type of video and pictures you need to see. Twitter has never been a strength for me because, as you can probably tell here, me boiling down a point to one sentence and have it be cogent and interesting is not easy for me to do. The people who are good at that, it does come down to cogent thought and communication and the way you structure a thought. And I'm not good at doing it in a short amount of characters like that. So I've always been better in a radio podcast form, but you learn to adapt to how to communicate what you want to get across. So I think there are very few people that are good at kind of all of them. And this has actually been, it's consistent in my field forever. It used to be people who were on TV or radio had a very difficult time trying to write a piece for the Washington Post. And oftentimes people who wrote for the Washington Post had a very difficult time understanding how to present themselves on TV or radio. There are unicorn-like people like Tony Kornheiser and Michael Wilbon who are able to do all of it. But there are very, very few, Stephen A. Smith actually too. There are very, very few people who are capable of doing all of it. I think we're just in a new communication space where being really good on Twitter, being really good on Instagram is not the same as being really good on a television show. And I think we're all kind of learning that as we go along.
Fascinating. How do you get smart on how to deal with the data that comes with this digital marketing? I find when I am fooling around with my podcast and Twitter and all the other venues, I'm inundated with advice and metrics and things like that. I have trouble receiving advice because I think it's all BS sometimes. And then at the other side, I go, my sister who had a dress company, she has a cocktail party for, 20 women in Charlotte, and all of a sudden sales jump 60%. And I go, well, it works, but how do you know whom to believe?
So I think some of it is the downloads are the downloads, and the numbers are the numbers. And, oftentimes rates are just kind of set and the numbers are the numbers. So from that perspective, it's actually quite simple. And it just kind of goes back to old rating metrics, except that they're more exact than they used to be. Like when I was in radio, it was, you want this specific demographic, 18 to 54-year-old men, especially in sports, because these are the people that the advertisers covet and want to go after. And if your rating hits this certain metric, these are the rates you can charge. Now, the metrics are far more exact because you can get literal download numbers, literal impression numbers, all of that stuff. You can go to an advertiser and say, per CPM, it's 20, 30, 40, whatever, your number that you think you could set at the marketplace. And it's quite simple transaction, actually. It's the other things, the partnerships that are the part that I think everybody's is different. And the ones that figure out, how do I offer something to a brand to make them want to be associated less with the shows and more with me or John or Ben or all of us together? What can we offer them to make that valuable to them from an advertising point of view? But I actually think for the most part, it's a pretty simple measurement transaction, because especially on national brands who you'll hear ubiquitously throughout podcasts, whether it's Blue Apron or stamps.com or whatever you listen to, and you hear all of these things, it really is this is what we're spending. What are your numbers? Great. We'll take this amount of shows. And it's actually quite a simple transaction.
Interesting. So for the rest of Ampire, you've got a crime section. You've got a woman who focuses on money laundering. Is that part of the experimentation going into other non-sports things? And how does that fit into your overall strategy?
Yes. So, a number of those shows probably haven't been produced in a little while, but they were just up on the website as examples of things that we have produced in the past. Getting people to stay with it and do long-term shows. I think people find out this is harder than it looks. I don't know what episode number you're in with this, but
160.
Okay. So you are in the top 5% of people who do this, decide they want to, it's not their living, at least initially, but want to do this and continue to do it. If you get past 20 shows, you're probably in the top 10 to 15%, because I think people realize how hard it is to do this on a weekly, bi-weekly, whatever basis, that anyone does it. It's not as simple as it looks. And then sometimes people get frustrated because they think they'll put something out and they're going to aggregate some big audience. And I'm here to tell you that that's very, very unlikely for really just about anybody. So it's a hard thing to do, and you got to passionately want to do it. And then there's reasons behind it. And because, of my background really in communication, I want to share that with others to produce for them. What message do you want to get across? And I often, when I talk to, we did shows like in the crime genre to show that we could produce things like that. I also produce a lot of B2B podcasts for businesses, companies, for a variety of different reasons. You will get a professional sounding podcast or video, whatever you want. We're going to help you structure it. I'm going to explain to you how we go about structuring what we do. And we're going to give that to you at a cost. But I want to know, what is your reasoning for doing this? Because I want to help you, but I want your money to be well spent for bringing in our expertise for it. And so we boil down to, why do you want to do this? And, what is the purpose of it outside of, I just want to be on YouTube or I just want to have a podcast? I tell people who own businesses, these things are extremely valuable as marketing tools and an extension of your brand and personality if produced correctly. That's where we come in. But I need to know what your goals are. Do you want more clients? Do you want more people to know about this thing? Are you hoping to become a consultant? Are you hoping to extend your brand because you want to be a public speaker? There's a lot of different reasons why you would want to have these type of things. And I always want to know what the reasoning is so I can help you get to where you want to get to and message yourself correctly.
No, the ROI isn't just advertising. It can be lots of different things, whether it's a calling card or a way to, get your message across differently. That sounds exactly what you're helping people think through, in addition to producing the actual content.
Yes, 100%. I've been on air for a long time. I'm connected directly to the Commanders. I'm trying to build an audience. John works for ESPN. He's trying to build an audience. It's different than when I work with this one medical group here locally, where, what is your goal for this? Do you want new patients? Do you want to try to become perceived regionally as an expert in your field? And this may offer opportunities through other avenues to not only get more patients, but get appearances as an expert in your field. What are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to sell things? Do you want to sell herbal supplements? You have to have a reason for wanting to do this. And whatever those reasons are, if you have a clear understanding of what that is, I can help you structure the show so that you get that point across, because that's where sometimes this stuff is lost. Yes, the gates are open. Anybody can do this. That's a plus. And I would encourage anybody to use it, especially as a marketing tool, but you want to do it right. And you want to have a reason why. Anybody who builds a business, they put out we're doing this because we want to get that. You need to look at this the exact same way. Why am I doing this? And what's the purpose of doing this?
Really interesting stuff. All right. As a Commander fan, and in my town up in New York, it was the veterinarian, my father, and me who had to ward off two sets of Jets fans, Giants fans, Cowboys fans interspersed in that. The resurgence of the team this year has been a joy for me to watch, because it's been 25 years of misery. And I'd have to go in and put in the VHS tape of the John Facenda narrated first Super Bowl season and enjoy all that. What's it been like being a local guy in the space, watching the Jaden Daniels team start to take a different form than we've seen for a long time?
I mean, I'm optimistic by nature, so I always kind of feel like, hey, they're going to be good or they're going to be better than people think. This year was very different because everything was so different. New coaching staff, new front office, 30 plus new players. So like the whole team's completely different. And then the owners are new and they're in their first full season and they hired all of these people. And then I watched, Jaden Daniels in college and saw the talent and am very hopeful. They get this young quarterback and he's going to come in here, but it's kind of baked in that everything would be up and down because it's just so new. And as highly choreographed as the sport is, it's very difficult to get everybody on the same page. And then, there's a lot of new faces here. What kind of chemistry could they actually build? But I mean, I was optimistic what I saw in the summer, but this is a little beyond. It's really ahead of schedule. It's testament to the decisions that were made across the board. It's a testament to the roster that was built. It's a testament to the coaching staff who preached chemistry and people first and relationships. We're not cold-hearted. We really want this team to come together. It's happened. Daniels obviously is an extraordinary talent. He's way ahead of the curve. He's having, in my opinion, let's see how long he misses time with an injury, but he is having, and I don't even think it's an overstatement, the best rookie season any quarterback's ever had. I mean, his metrics are ridiculous. Every week they're rewriting their own history. We have all these crazy stats where I have to say things like, since World War II, since 1991, since 1973.
Sammy Baugh.
Yeah, or Sammy Baugh.
Punting soon.
Or even in that vein, Daniels was going into the game against Carolina, led the NFL in completion percentage, and that's unchanged because he went 2 for 2 before he got injured. So
right.
He's leading the NFL in completion percentage. The only rookie quarterback to ever lead the NFL in completion percentage is a guy from 1939, and he probably threw 9 passes a game. So what's happening right now is extremely unusual, but it is fun. I could be as optimistic as I want. You could not have convinced me in the middle of the season they'd be the highest scoring team in the league. I would have never believed that, but that's where they are.
It just seems like a sleeping giant of a fan base, too. I don't know if I'd describe it as just not really a betrayal, but just sort of a dormancy with the team that all of a sudden you've got a team that was regional as much as sort of local, and they're ready.
Yes, they're ready. The crowds are coming back. And I always described it this way, so because I'm connected to the team, I go to a lot of events. Not have to. I go to a lot of events and I interact with the public a lot. I like doing it. And invariably, before the new owners came in, everywhere I went at any event, at some point in time, no matter what the event was about, Dan Snyder's name would get brought up. And you could just feel the air come out of the room. But what always gave me hope was it was never ambivalence. It was anger. People were angry about what was going on. I get more concerned in sports, especially someone who puts out content. Ambivalence is your enemy, not anger. Ambivalence is. That means people don't care. That's never happened here. People care deeply about this team and just want it to be better. And the signs of it being better are not only just obviously evident, it's just happening faster than I ever could have anticipated. The closest thing that I can think of recently that even looks anything close to this, and I work with London Fletcher's, one of the all-time great linebackers in the NFL. He calls the games with me on Sundays, and he played for the greatest show on turf, Rams, that won a Super Bowl. And I was asking him about it because what people don't remember about that team was they were terrible throughout the 90s. They were 4-12 the year before Kurt Warner came in as a backup. He wasn't even supposed to start as a backup, and they posted over a 5-year run among the greatest offensive runs by any team ever. And it does feel like it came out of nowhere. And that's what this feels like a little bit, that this is kind of just out of nowhere, that they're not just good, but contending. And, we'll see how far the team goes.
Oh, great stuff. As we wind down here, favorite moment that you experienced with the team and maybe your favorite player?
That I've covered?
It doesn't have to be covered.
Oh, man. Well, so I have a list of favorite players, but I mean, I've been very fortunate. I've been in and around the team for a long time. I got to host the Joe Gibbs show on radio for a couple of seasons. And I mean, that guy might as well be a deity around here. So that was kind of pinch myself stuff. Cause I was a kid growing up here, going to RFK Stadium, watching their teams win a lot. And then when he came back and I'm covering the team, now I'm hosting a show with him. That was really special. The play earlier this year at the end of the Monday night game where Jaden Daniels hit Terry McLaurin late that sealed a win. And I described afterwards as it's the beginning. I'm never going to forget that, especially if this team keeps going in the direction it's going, where it looks like the past is really in the past and we're now a contender. That's going to be the moment. And, to be there, to have the opportunity to call that is really, it's very special. Like, I don't take for granted for a second this position. I'm only the third person to be the play-by-play announcer of this team since 1979.
Wow.
So I don't take that position for granted. It's pinch me moments. I just want to get better every time I do it. I think we owe it to this fan base that they get passion and energy and they get their story told really well and that they're proud of the broadcast. Because, like, to your point earlier, like, and what we were talking about earlier, there's no ambivalence for this team. It's there. Everybody's just waiting for it to come back. And it does feel like it's here now.
Really cool. Bram, how do listeners find you? How do they find Ampire? What's the best way to keep in touch?
So Ampire, Ampire media.com. That's our website. You can catch all of our podcasts there. We're going through a rebrand, so it may look a little different over the next couple of weeks. We're all over on all the social media. I'm at Real Bram W, John Keim, Ben Standig. You can catch all of their shows. You can get their podcasts, John Keim Report, Bram Weinstein Show, Last Man Standing, anywhere you get your podcasts. We do air John's show and my show on YouTube, on the Ampire Media YouTube channel. We do live streams. You can find us just about really anywhere.
Google if you can't even do that, but I will have all those on the show notes as well. Bram, really appreciate you coming on, and continued success with your venture in Ampire, and let's hope the Commanders make a deep, deep run in the playoffs.
Oh, I hope you're right. Thank you for having me on.